Welcome to another episode of Coming to Your Senses, where we talk about navigating the labyrinth of the mind and emerging victorious. And my guest today is Julia Felton, who is also known as the Business Wrangler. She blends corporate expertise with the wisdom of her rescue horses, her rescue horses, helping people transform the way that they work together. So welcome to the podcast, Julia.
Well, thank you, Jules, so much for inviting me on. So excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you here because I know I always say this. I never know where the conversation's going to go, but I really genuinely don't, because you and I haven't had the opportunity to catch up very much. And I'm really curious as to where you'll take the first question of, can you tell us about a time in your life where you came to your senses and where and what that led you to?
Oh, a time in a life when I came to my senses. Oh, lots of times. But this is probably the most pivotal one in my life. There I am sitting around a fire in the African bush in Namibia, and I'm at an elephant conservation project. And I was volunteering there during a sabbatical, actually, from my corporate role. And we'd been like building stone walls around water, I don't know what to call them, water wells, to prevent the elephants getting to the water so that the villagers still had water. And then, so we spent 1 week doing that and then 1 week out on safari. So I was there for about a month doing that. And we're sitting around this campfire and somebody said, "Who's been swimming with dolphins?" And I put up my hand, me, I've been swimming with dolphins. And then they asked that killer question, which actually changed the trajectory of my life, which was, what was the experience like? And I sat there. I couldn't say anything, because in that moment, I realized, I remember going there. I went to Mexico for my friend's 30th birthday, but I have no recollection of what happened there at all. And in that moment, that's when I realized I was going through life, ticking things off a list, doing all these adventures, but never really being present and in the moment to what was happening. So I wasn't really experiencing them, because, I was in the corporate world and my mind was always busy about, all these work things and everything going on. And in good old Julia fashion, I was like, okay, so there's something here. And that prompted me actually to go and live in the African bush for 3 months and train to be a safari guide, because I felt, what better way to get present and really start paying attention to the environment around us than live in the bush, where if you don't pay attention, you're going to be some lion's dinner. So that's really what got me out in Africa. And I spent time studying and qualified to be a safari guide. But also really opened my mind to what nature and the natural world could teach us about business. So in my business, I talk a lot about, what the lessons we can learn from nature to apply to the natural world. So that's kind of where that stemmed from at the beginning.
Do you know, I really love that. I love the realization of, yeah, I've done that and I've done that and I've done that. And that, what was the experience like? And that realization of, I don't know, but I've done it. I've got no recollection of it. I can't really explain. And I think that's so relevant to, I think even more so, I know that this was a while back for you, but I think it's become, this whole tick box living has become so prevalent. I've done a little bit more traveling over the last few years, and I noticed this, and I noticed it living in the city of York, of people take the photo of something and then keep moving, and then they take the photo and keep moving, and it's that lack of connection. And I'm curious, when you I mean, 3 months of training to be a safari ranger, that's pretty amazing. I'm curious as to know what that entailed, and what was the shift that you noticed from the, I'm going to call it the tick box living, through to actually experiencing? What was that shift like?
Well, it was just a shift of just awareness, I guess, for want of a better word. Becoming really, really aware of the surroundings. When you're living out in Africa, it's a beautiful place, right? But just that appreciation and that gratitude for watching amazing sunrises and sunsets every day. For being really aware of, when we were sleeping out in the bush at night, when we weren't in our camp, of you know, what's happening in the nighttime and all the animals moving around, and just I think an appreciation of how interconnected and interdependent everything is. Because, my survival depended on everyone else around us. If we were sleeping in the bush at night, it depended on everyone staying awake during their watch time, right? to keep us all alert. And it was a real community, but there was also a massive tranquility, when you disconnect from the grid. And, this was in 2006. So mobile phones weren't as prevalent as today. I think I had a mobile with me, but you didn't really, and social media hadn't really grown in any way that it was today. So you were just really in the moment, with a few distractions. I think most of us are really guilty. I know I am, of sitting there with my phone all day, checking it. And so I think it was really that, and just coming back to myself, and, use that word connection. I think that's really important, and reconnecting to myself. What did I want and what did I need in that moment? Because I think a lot of us go through life and we've become quite disconnected from who we are and what do we really want as well. And I think COVID was a big wake-up call for people. I think a lot of people did have this bit of an epiphany during COVID about, well, am I really want to stay on that hamster wheel that I've been on for years and years and years? And in some way, being out in Africa on my sabbatical was similar for me. I was like, that's when I had that wake-up call about, do I want to stay on the hamster wheel of going back to corporate after this, or do I want to do something different? And then, of course, the experiences then caused me to decide, well, actually, no, I'm not going to go back to corporate, at least not for the long term.
If you've listened to the first episode of Coming to Your Senses, you'll know that in the early 2000s, I experienced a breakdown. I tried different therapies, but it was coaching that truly helped me transform my life. Initially, when I discovered coaching, though, I couldn't afford it. And it was a kind soul who sponsored me not only to have coaching, but also to train and become a coach. And my promise to them was that I would pay it forward. And I've done that in many ways over the years, initially through social media and private Facebook group called Confidence Revolution, and also through Coming to Your Senses, the podcast. But it triggered for me a passion to really want to make and create a secure, supportive space for people to be able to come together and have conversations that transform their lives. So I created the Conscious Conversations community. It's a group where we meet on more than once a month, and we have a focused theme which is guided by the community and facilitated by me. There's hundreds of hours of learning and resources and materials to help you transform your life in a like-minded space. Because I get passionate about it, and because this was my promise to pay it forward, I'm offering you the opportunity to trial it for £1 for the first month. If that appeals to you, then head to juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer. juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer to explore what's available for you through being part of a conscious community. So the word that comes to mind around that is bravery, and I think that realizing what you're longing for, you're yearning for yourself, and either that going, oh wow, and that sudden awareness of, and I've got it, this is amazing. Or actually, I don't have anything in my life that is really fulfilling me, and I've got a yearning to do that. And I think that bravery to step into choosing what you want, I don't think we should underestimate that. And I was wondering whether you can speak a bit more to that, the realization of, I don't want to go back to corporate, but equally what that then moves you to, and the bravery of then creating what it is that you wanted.
So thank you, because I never really think of myself as brave. I just do it. And I've noticed that most of the things that I do successfully are the ones where I don't really overthink it. There isn't a logical plan. It seems really irrational. I just jump in and do it. And with the corporate, I mean, I think what I got to appreciate when I was in Africa, like I said, was, did I really want to be on that hamster wheel of, getting up at 6:15 in the morning, going to work, being at work all day and not getting home till 9 o'clock at night. And I had my first horse then, and I never got to see him. And the realization that actually life was really precious, and there was so much more to it than this kind of box I'd been in of the corporate infrastructure of living on that treadmill of just going to work, coming back, going to work, coming back, usually working most weekends. And also realizing the sacrifice I've made for that. Along the way, I'd burnt a couple of relationships, and I was like, I always say, people say to me, have you ever been married? And as you know, I'm still single and never had kids or anything. I was like, well, I was married to my job for like most of my life. So I never had that opportunity. So I did, in all transparency, I did come back from my sabbatical when I'd been in Africa. I did go back to the corporate role for a year because they made it suicidal not to, but never really enjoyed it. And that was actually that was probably the most challenging time in my whole life, was that year back between them and when I left. Because I went back, the team that I'd headed up and run for 10 years when I'd set this business unit up that I was heading, was run by my deputy while I was away. And I'd always said to my boss, I can't come back and take over the division because, she would have been running it for a year. It didn't make sense. But I went back and I just felt like a round peg in a square hole. I didn't really have a proper job to do. I didn't have a team, and I felt really discombobulated about what I was doing. And eventually, I didn't really want to be there, but also at the same time, during that year back, I actually sold the business unit for the company, and all of my team TUPE'd to a new organization with the business, and my role was made redundant. So that gave me the opportunity and kind of forced my hand. So I know you say you might think I'm brave, and maybe not, because circumstances to some way made that happen.
And I would also say, I still think it's brave, even though it seems to have been orchestrated in that way, whether you had a hand in it or not. You could have gone and got another job. you could have carried on that trajectory.
Well, I think the universe had a hand in it, that's for sure. It provided me, I think it was interesting. Yeah, I could go and get another job, and I did try for a while, I've got to confess. Because I didn't really know anything about entrepreneurship and setting up your own business. Actually, the first thing I did when my role was made redundant in corporate was I went to train to be a riding instructor, because that's what I wanted to do when I was young, when I was like 14, 15, leaving school. I wanted to go and train to be a riding instructor, and I was told to get a proper job by my parents. So I never pursued that passion. So there I was, what was I, early 40s, I guess. And I went to train to be a riding instructor. And I've never taught anyone to ride, but it was like something that I really have wanted to do. So I went and did it. And I did that for a while, but the equestrian world, actually working as a riding instructor and working in a yard, wasn't really where I wanted to be. And I wasn't using enough of my problem solving and intellectual skills in that particular role. So then that's when I tried to get a job. But of course, you've got to remember then, now we're in sort of 2009, the height of the massive recession. And I think it's really interesting, Jules, when you're in something, you don't really know what's going on outside. I know that sounds a bit naive. So I'd gone back into corporate, I was working, I was selling the business unit for them. And then it's only when the role got made redundant, and I kind of almost looked up and went, oh, we're in a massive recession.
Right.
What's going on? So I actually had 2 lever arch files of applications I sent for jobs.
Wow.
I had one interview, and I'd say from 99% of them, I never even heard back. because at that point I became really clear. I didn't want to go to London. So I was looking for a job more local. I lived down in Sussex at the time. And I was like pretty much prepared to halve my salary in order to do that. But nobody could believe I really wanted to do that. So no jobs became coming. And I had some career outplacement through, I was at that point working at Deloitte. So I had some career outplacement. So that's when I found out about setting up your own business. So that's what I did. But actually the impact of applying for all of those jobs and never getting one absolutely knocked my confidence for sex. I felt like I come out of corporate, I felt I was quite a smart cookie, I felt I could put my hand to most things. And there I was, just like that total rejection from all of these companies, even though most of them didn't even directly tell me, but their lack of response I took as rejection, massively dented my confidence. And I think knocked me back maybe even like 10 years or more. It took a long time. And even still nowadays, I'm a bit like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So it fundamentally changed me as a person, that whole experience. But I did set up the business, and it's had a lot of the iterations along the way, as a lot of businesses do. But yeah, today I've got a great business and a lifestyle that I really love. So that's good.
It is good, and even when when you immediately jumped on and you lit up about where you're living and what your view is, seeing the fields and the sheep and all of that sort of thing, and that's why I think it's brave, because I think it's very quote unquote easy to stay in a world because we know it, because it gives us the illusion of security, because I don't think that there really is that security there.
Never at all.
We get the finances, and so I think it's that's why I say it's brave, and it's a word that I now deliberately use with that, because when I left the world of show business, a number of people started using it toward me, and even when I left my marriage, a number of people started using it towards me. And like yourself, I was like, I'm not brave. I'm just doing something because it seems like the right thing to do. And yet now I can see from the outside how actually it is brave to go against the grain, or to do something that's so radically different, and to do something out of our cultural conditioning as well as our personal conditioning. I think it is brave. What I'd love to know about is that so you obviously as a teenager had this love of horses and wanted to work with horses, and then took a different trajectory, but it was something that kept pulling you back. And yet you still only saw it in that one way of being a riding instructor. You didn't realize there was other. When did that shift of realizing there were other ways of working with horses?
Yeah, really when I got my first horse, actually, because I was working at Arthur Andersen, and Arthur Andersen got embroiled in a big scandal called the Enron scandal that ultimately took the whole company down. And I had to manage my team through about a 9-month transition of, we were at Arthur Andersen, but where was it going? What was going to happen to the company? Who was going to buy us? Was our roles going to be made redundant? What was going to happen? And that for me was a bit of a wake-up call from that traditional paradigm, because I'd always been taught a company will look after you, Julia. Work for a good company and they'll look after you for life, sort of thing,
Sacrifice your life for them and it will be fine.
Absolutely. That's what I was doing. Absolutely. I was. And so that's actually what prompted me to buy my first horse, was during that time. A friend of mine said to me, let's go on a ranching holiday in America. I had never been on a ranching holiday. I loved the idea. So my eyes lit up at the opportunity to do that. But I hadn't been riding in about 7 years then, and I hadn't been around horses for about 7 years. But I found somewhere, and I went to go and buy some equipment, because we were going to be in Wyoming in the winter, bringing the cattle down from the mountains down to the pasture for the winter. So I needed some quite warm clothes to go riding in. I went to a riding shop, got talking to the girl behind the counter, and said I was trying to find somewhere to ride to get a few hours in before we went. And she said, oh, I've got a horse. Why don't you come and ride that? And I started riding her retired horse. And then she had this other horse that she didn't really get on with. And I do believe that there's horse people combinations, a bit like people combinations, right? You get on with some, you don't get on with others. And she had this one horse, and we just formed this partnership. I loved him. She didn't really get on with him. And I ended up buying him from her. So then I've got this horse, and I'm like, I don't really know how to look after it. When I was a kid, I worked on a riding stables at the weekends, right? But that was like 20 years before, 30 years before. I was like, okay. And so that actually prompted me, and with a friend taking me to a Monty Roberts demonstration, where I actually started to learn about natural horsemanship and working with the ways of the horse. So actually, although I did my riding instructor exams, that's done in a very, very traditional way. And there's a very British Horse Society protocol of how you do things. And actually, that was a bit grating, because I rubbed up against some of the concepts that they did. Because I realized that from the work I did with Monty Roberts, because I then studied with him and his team, there was a way that you could work with horses much more naturally. And that actually prompted me to go and work with a horse trainer in America who was all about working with horses with no ropes, no lines or anything. We call it at liberty. Her name's Carolyn Resnick. And she taught me so much about how to build a relationship with a horse. And she'd learned all of her lessons from actually going out to a waterhole in Arizona, I think, where she was brought up, and watching wild mustangs. So all of her lessons were based on observing wild horses. How did wild horses interact? Then let's do the same with that. And along that journey as well, trying to get a job, actually one of the few that I was offered an interview for, the one I did, was actually with a guy who did equine facilitated leadership. And I'd never heard of this. And I'm like, what's that? But I went out to meet this gentleman. We didn't end up working together, but he opened my mind to the fact that there was this body of work where I could combine my corporate experience with the horses and help leaders and teams work more effectively together by partnering with the horses, because the horses show people their invisible behaviors, and they teach people how to become better leaders and work more effectively in teams. So it was like everything. It's a bit of a journey, right? All the breadcrumbs start adding up and you get to the destination. It wasn't something I knew about initially, but I think, and that goes back to my Africa experience about being out in the wild. I really want to work with my horses and keep my horses in as natural a state as possible, given that they're in a field in Yorkshire, and they're not on massive mountain plains and stuff like that. But I always try and keep them very au naturel, without shoes or anything like that. So just to replicate that kind of thing. But that's how I realized there was a different way of being, that it's not about force and coercion, which actually some of the traditional lines of horsemanship probably came from, but it's much more about a place of collaboration and partnership. And actually, those are the whole ethics that I bring into everything I do, is how do we collaborate together to achieve things? Because nature works in collaboration to make everything happen. But yeah, in the business world, we're often fueled by egos and people wanting to work in silos. And how do we break those down to make everything work more effectively together? Because that's what the horse herd does. It's all about collective responsibility, collective leadership. And that's what I'm so passionate about today.
Oh, I love all of that. I do you know what I love? It is the unexpected and the invisible connection of it all. And it's it's the Steve Jobs quote of, you can't join the dots until you've gone past them. And it's that just that knowing, whatever it was that took you to that sabbatical, that then all of a sudden just started getting you questioning of what else, and maybe this and maybe that. And the beautiful the only person that you get the job interview with is somebody who happens to do equine leadership. It's like,
yeah,
if that's not a beautiful invitation from the world, then I don't know what is. And having experience, just for anyone who's listening or watching that hasn't experienced being around horses full stop, but I think that that they have this, having, I think I've done it a handful of times with yourself and with other equine leaders as well, is that it's quite, I'm going to say surreal, but not, I don't mean that as in real, it's such an unusual experience to suddenly start being around a being that is pointing to stuff and highlighting things and giving you an insight that you maybe wouldn't have had through any other means. And having got my dog, nearly 5 years ago now, it's a similar thing for me. I've learned very much from him about the more I can be aware of what's going on for myself, I can have a potential awareness of what's going on for him, and the two then work in collaboration. And it is so interesting that in this constructed business world, that so often doesn't matter what size of the business is, that there seems to be this very rigid even. I've not been drinking, I promise. Rigid, very linear process that is siloed, that is very constructed way of doing things. And actually the natural world and the way it functions is so very different. And there is collaboration between species in so many levels where we can learn from each other. I'm wondering if there's any either a personal story for you of where you first noticed that horse communication that shifted things for you, or whether there's a client story that you could share at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love that Steve Jobs quote, because that you were sharing there about joining the dots. You know, you can't do it in the moment. You've got to look back at it, because I think that's what I realized. You know, once I got my horse Toby, and I started working with him, and I started learning more about natural horsemanship, you know, I realized, and looking back, my horses have taught me the best leadership and teamwork lessons that I've ever learned. Effective communication, way better than any training courses that I'd ever gone on.
Interesting.
So a couple of stories I can share with you of lessons I've learned from them. So I'm just thinking, so quite early on when I had him, he was on what we call full livery. So people used to look after him during the week for me while I was going to London. And then at the weekend, I'd go up there and ride him and look after him. I had a whole summer where I could not catch him, Jules. Every single time I went into the field, he'd run away. And I tried bribery and corruption. I bought the best organic carrots, you know, big green tops, still wouldn't work. And I didn't know this at the time, but what I now know looking back on it was, you know, I was going to the field. He's like, who is this? This is my miserable owner, Julia. What's she doing? She's coming to ride me. It's like she's on a self-serving principle. It's all about her. And he just said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't like your energy. I don't like your vibe. And literally, you know, I was walking in, you know, power walk in. And it was all about me. It was absolutely all about me. With no connection or recognition of what he needed in that moment. So he taught me a huge number of lessons about how to show up better in the workplace. And the irony is, looking back on it now, is that at a similar time, I got some feedback from my team that I was really aggressive and assertive. And I didn't pay them enough attention. But, you know, my mind in the workplace, I was just really focused on what I needed to get done. You know, I've got all of these things to do today. And I wasn't really in the market for chit chat and stuff like that. But realizing now that actually people need that connection and that relationship building. And it's not just about getting the job done here and now. There's something much bigger about it. So remind me what your question was again, because I know I've gone off track here a bit.
No, not at all. And actually, I'm going to pick up on what you said, because I think it's really pertinent for people to hear, is that, you know, you've had feedback from two different directions here. You've had feedback from your team going, you're just too aggressive. You're head down, you're getting on. There's no connection. We're probably feeling sidelined, or however they worded it. And then your horse is like, get lost. You're not in control. We're working together. or not at all, and just distancing. And I think that what we can all, and I am hands up here, this is one of the things that my dog has certainly taught me, is that it can be very, very easy to get caught up in, I've just spent half an hour writing a list of all the things that need to get done this week. And I have gone into, oh my God, there's so much. How am I going to get it all done? So I think it's very easy on a day-to-day basis to go, right, okay, well, I need to walk the dog, then I need to do this, then I need to get that done, then I need to get that done, I need to get that done. All of those things become isolated experiences, a bit like the tick box of your dolphin experience. Yep. Rather than actually, yes, I do need to walk the dog, but whilst I'm doing that, be with him. Don't be thinking about whatever else needs to be done or completely disconnected from his experience, my experience of what's going on in the world. And I think that's a really big exponential lesson that you're sharing there. I'm then going back to my question, which I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but was basically asking for, can you explain some of share some experiences of the lessons that you've learned from our wonderful horse friends?
Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons, and I think this is so pertinent to what you were just saying there, is that the horses demand your attention. Focus is so important. And when we're with the horses, they will let us lead them, providing they know you are going to be a leader that's going to keep them safe. So how do you keep them safe? You've got to be aware of where the mountain lion is that's going to kill us. Because, a horse is a prey animal. So its biggest challenge is, where's the mountain lion that's going to kill us? So the horse will give you his attention and his leadership, providing you can pay attention. And I think that what I'm really noticing in business right now is this lack of attention, because people are so busy, exactly as you described. We're trying to get through our tick list. That we need to pay attention on 3 levels. We talk about attention to self, attention to others, and attention to the environment. And most of us, we might do attention to self, going, oh, that's not feeling very good, but we're not really very good at doing attention to others and attention to the environment. And I think the biggest gift that any leader can give their team members is the gift of attention. Noticing people come into their office, not just sitting there tapping the keyboard or scrolling on your phone. Actually look up, eye contact, really, that listening, but like what I call whole body listening, right? You're listening to everything. You're listening to what people don't say, what they say. You're looking at their all their nonverbal communication. And that's what the horses have been great about teaching us, that is the power of nonverbal communication. Because my horses know when I'm having a good day and when I'm having a bad day. But yet within the business world, we've kind of lost the reading of that and reading the energy of the situation. So, I mean, it's interesting, when I was in the corporate world, if you'd spoken about energy, anyone would have thought you were like whoopity-doop-doo, mad as a hatter, right?
Get her out of here as quick as possible.
Exactly. That was for, hippies and but nowadays we have started to talk about energy, and I think people are really beginning to understand that people have an energy, have a vibe. And I talk a lot about business energetics. So how do we create the right energy that people want to be in, so that you can pay that attention to people and you can really connect with others? And this goes back to the question you're asking, because the way that business has been traditionally constructed is on that little pyramid, right? And this is from the army, command and control structures. But we're moving to an environment where there's no way one leader can know everything. You need this collective leadership, shared leadership going on. So I talk about a concept called teamship, which is where actually you bring a collection of people together to lead the business through whatever needs to happen. And this is what happens in the horse herds. Everyone in the horse herd, every horse member, is responsible for paying attention. They all have to pay attention to where the mountain lion could be, not just the leader. And in fact, the leader will actually go around and sneak up on people. And if the leader can sneak up on you, that means a mountain lion could have snuck up on you. So you weren't paying attention. You weren't doing your role within the herd and weren't being a good herd member. So I think this idea of collective responsibility is something that's really important as we go forward. And you can only do that collective responsibility if you're paying attention to what everyone else is saying and doing, and therefore being really present in the moment to what's happening.
I love this. I really, really love this. And one of the experiences that comes to mind for me was there were a group of us that were doing the equine coaching, and it was a stallion that was in the pen that we were working with, and we were all stood outside and everyone was going in individually just to see what would happen. And I remember this one lady, and I think this might have been the first time that I'd ever done this. So it was a very, very new experience. I wasn't used to being around horses whatsoever. And I remember this lady getting in the pen, and she kept looking over at us going, oh, he really likes me. He really likes me. And he was walking towards her. And so she was stroking his nose and he kept walking towards her. And so she kept stroking his nose. And what she wasn't realizing that she was doing was that she was walking backwards the whole time until he had literally pinned her into a corner. There was no aggression from him whatsoever. But he was just constantly just walking towards her, and all she was focused on was, oh, he must like me, he must like me, and kept looking over to us to go, oh, he likes me, he likes me, he likes me. And all of us were like, I don't think it's that. I don't think that's quite what's going on. And I think that the attention that I hear you talk about is how we can get so caught up in our perception of what's going on, rather than going, okay, well, this is my perception, is that he's walking towards me, therefore he must like me. However, what are you seeing and what could I learn from that as well? But I think we get caught up with there being a right, wrong, good, bad. And actually what we could all see and we're able to feed back to her is, I think the question that one of us asked was, where in your life do you get boxed into a corner? And she burst into tears.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments of her, she suddenly saw what was going on. And I think that this is where I think it's such a beautiful experience of where we truly give ourselves the space to experience what the natural world, which may be an animal, it may be the landscape, it may be the weather, can really give us the opportunity to see another viewpoint, can be a turning point for us. And I think that even with what you were talking about Africa, your initial experience of that and that realization of I experienced being in the sea with the dolphins, but I have no recollection of it. I can tick it off and say I've done it, but there was no connection there. It was and it's the same as completing that report and handing it in, but I've kind of got no connection to it, no relationship with it as well. With how the world is at the moment, which to me, I perceive the word I would use is awareness. There seems to be a lot of lack of personal awareness, let alone the bigger perspective of that. There seems to be a fair amount of chaos going on as well for various people. What advice or guidance could you offer that can help people have more awareness, think about where they're paying attention maybe, so that they can have more clarity in their day-to-day life?
Such a great question, because the world is in chaos. It's changing at rapid speed. We're all having to embrace change on a day-to-day basis, literally. I think for me, actually now more than ever, the irony is, as fast as everything is going, there's more need for us to slow down, to reset. And when we look to nature has natural rhythms, right? But in business and in life, we tend to put our foot to the metal, go, 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 go. And the irony isn't lost on me that you put your foot to the metal and what happens, your heartbeat stops doing that and it straight lines and then you're dead, right? Really, but that's what happens. So I think the paying attention actually only comes from slowing down. I'm really looking at what's happening around us. I invite people at the end of this, listening to this, go outside and just listen to what all the sounds are out there. Maybe even close your eyes so that you have to rely on your other senses, and just start really tuning in to what is in the amazing environment around us, because that starts helping you hone those attention skills. When you're like, you can start hearing the birds sing, and actually they were singing all the time, you just didn't hear them before, right? Or you're walking in the woods and the leaves are crunching under your feet, but to begin with you don't hear them. So I think it's just about slowing down to tune in, and actually by doing that I think we speed up. I mean, that's the irony, it's this slow down to speed up and do a reset. And I invite people, just go and spend some time in nature, and because it's such a powerful healing modality, being out there, when we can just, because it's part of the world, right? We're part of nature, nature's part of us. But, to go back to your silo comment earlier on, we kind of have siloed ourselves from that environment and the nature we're in. So how do we reconnect to it? Just being out there, and yeah, it's great if you've got a dog or, an animal or something that, the studies show, just stroking your dog reduces stress, all of these activities. And I think when we start reducing the stress, then we can remain more grounded, and then we have a much more clearer view of what's going on. Because I think there's a tendency for, when there's chaos around us, what we do is we throw more energy at it. Do more, 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 more. And actually, what I learned from the horse herds is this: in times of chaos, the herd convenes, brings all its energy down and slows down. And from that space makes an informed decision. Do we need to run away? Or, oh yeah, that smoke over there, it's not a fire, it's just somebody's barbecue, Let's make it. But when we're in that chaotic energy, because we're like reacting to everything, I think it's very difficult to make any grounded decisions. And actually that's where we've got to really slow down, come back to self, and then go, oh yes, now that's the decision I need to make. But from a space of having observed everything going around us and paid attention, and then just refocused ourselves and controlled our energy. Because we know, right, like a laser cuts through anything, the fire sparkler doesn't. Loads of energy, but it's not effective. So actually, it's this, for me, it's in the chaos right now, is actually slowing down to enable us to speed up, so that we can see the picture and see what's happening, so that we don't get consumed and on the bandwagon of everything else that's happening. And of course that's what we see a lot happening on social media, everyone jumping in. Just step back and see, is that the way you want to go? What do you want to do?
Yeah, it is this wonderful paradox of life, is that the more you slow down, actually the more you can end up being far more productive and effective, because you're kind of not sweeping up after yourself really when you've been in the firefighting reactive mode. I think that's such a brilliant point, Julia. And it's really interesting to know that the horse herd, that's what they do, is that they're collectively coming and bringing that energy together to then work out. And I didn't know that they work in such a collective way, to make sure how they're all functioning together, for the best of the herd, which I find really fascinating. Is there anything I haven't asked you today that you would like to talk about or share?
Wow, I could go on all day.
Me too.
Yeah, I know. What am I going to say? I just think that I just invite people to be open to different ways of learning about themselves and learning about the environment and the space that we're in. Because, I was fortunate, I loved horses. I stumbled into learning about, nature and from my horses and that experience. But I know for some people, they might be listening to us and going, oh my God, Jules and Julia, what are you talking about? Horses, nature, how that improves business. But I just know when I step back and take a different perspective, I just believe there's so much we can learn from nature about different and more effective ways to lead businesses, to lead our lives, run the planet. we are at a tipping point right now in what's going on astrologically, economically. I think there's a lot that's going to change. I think we're seeing a breaking down of the old ways of doing things, and that's scary, and that's what's putting people into chaos. But I just invite people to be open to, there's always new ways to do things, and a lot of us have got stuck in the old ways of doing things, and they're the ways we've been conditioned, right, over the years to run our lives, get a proper job, work there all day, but things are changing, fundamentally changing in the world, and I just invite people to embrace it and not fight it, because the change is going to happen whatever we do. So, enjoy the ride of it, really, and just be open to it. I'm always about challenging the status quo and doing things differently. And that served me well. But I know that's not for everybody. And maybe if I hadn't been so brave throughout my life, I might not be feeling that. But, there's always, I take the view of the world that, there's always great things happening, as much as there are things that aren't happening. It's this yin and yang. Everything happens in life. Everything's got a diametrically opposed opposite happening to it. But for everything that happens, there's always some good that's going to come out of something, even though you don't see it at the time. My redundancy, when it first happened, I wasn't madly, wonderfully happy about it, but I was, because I knew I needed to change, and it was the kick that I needed. But there's always something great that comes out of things. And I just encourage people to look and see, well, what's the gift in what's happening right now? Because somewhere there'll be some nugget of gold there for people to cling on to when things aren't going as well as they hope to.
And I think that sometimes it is that patience to go, I don't know why this is so messy right now. I can't see the other side of the chaos, but chaos always leads to order at some point. And so therefore, let's just be mindful of that. And I think the other thing to flag up from my perspective is the realization that the majority of people, the majority of the time, if they have a day off, a week off or whatever, they go to nature. Whether that is the seaside with a bucket and spade, or whether that is at the top of a mountain, or somewhere in between those two, we are innately, I think, drawn to that. So I don't think it is that out there or weird to start going, okay, well, what am I noticing? What can I see? What could I learn from that? And start to be even more open so that you can bring that into your life. It's an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you and talk about all of this. Thank you so much for being here. We'll put all of your details in the show notes so that people can reach out and find out more about the work that you do and connect with you. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been such a blast to talk to you. I'm so glad we've managed to reconnect and do this. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Julia.